So with just hours to go until Election Day, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are making their final pitch to voters in key battleground states. What will sway this election? Theoretically, it's still what James Carville said more than 30 years ago. It's the economy, stupid. Whether that's true these days is not entirely clear. Cheddar's Peter Green spent the last few days talking to some economists to better understand Trump's policy. It hinges around one word, Peter: tariffs. What are you learning?
Well, he called Kim Jong-un Rocket Man, and he calls himself Tariff Man. That's probably a ship he's going to go down on. Tariffs are just not going to work. Basically, they're a sales tax, and replacing income tax with tariffs, which he's discussed, won't do anything to fund Social Security, Medicare, or the military. So it's not a great idea from the economists I've talked to, and that seems to run from the right to the left.
He seems to suggest that tariffs will be paid by other countries. How is he wrong?
Well, look at it this way. Tariff is basically a sales tax. If you're a capitalist and you produce something that costs you, let's say you're a Chinese car maker and you can build a car for $7,000 and sell it for the mythical $10,000 here. 50% tariff means suddenly you're going to have to come up with another $3,500 to make your same profit margin. So you're just going to jack up your price from $10,000 to $12,500 or $13,500 for the price. The American car manufacturer sees that. He says, oh, that's the new market price, so I'll price just under it. So he's making all of that tariff is basically profit for him, all that difference between the sale price and the tariff point. So he's raking in another $3,000 or $3,500 in profit. And he raises his price to just under what the Chinese car makers charging, and there you go, American consumers are paying more. And that's pretty much exactly what happened during the pandemic with a lot of groceries. One price would be set because that's what supply was allowing, and turns out the market could bear it, so others raised their prices.
Yeah, you think iPhones are expensive now? Imagine what could happen if, in fact, these policies went into effect: double, triple, quadruple the price we pay now. It's interesting, though, it doesn't really seem to resonate among the voters. I would guess if you walked around a Trump rally, they wouldn't really understand the impact of tariffs. Economists certainly appear to. All right, corporate tax rates certainly up.
You're right
one more
there,
note.
Dave.
Go ahead.
I was walking around Philadelphia the last couple of weekends in the suburbs talking to voters on the left and on the right. There is very little understanding of this among most Trump voters. They have received information that this is going to help them. They don't question it. It's a very strange thing. A lot more people who say they're going to vote for Kamala Harris are suspicious of the idea of tariffs, and they get the idea of what a sales tax does to them.
Yeah, and to the same notion, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but speaking with a group of Trump supporters about the state of the economy today, which by about every metric on the planet, our healthy economy is ripping right now and is the envy of the world, said the economist, but that doesn't seem to resonate either. I do want to move on to corporate taxes. That is another central thesis of Trump's economic policy. What does he plan to do with them? What would be the impact?
So he's talking about cutting the corporate tax rate from what's now 21% to 15%. It was lowered from 28% to 21%. Remember, these are headline rates, not effective rates. The effective corporate tax rate, when the tax rate was 35%, was really about 20% because of all the various tax credits, off-seas and overseas investment dodges and that kind of thing. He's talking about lowering it to 15%. Well, the problem is that doesn't actually do much for the average consumer. Most corporations, as we've seen from the last few corporate tax cuts, use the money for share buybacks. They buy back stock from shareholders, and they buy back stock from executives, and a lot of people who are shareholders make a lot more cash, but it doesn't trickle into the regular economy, into investment, into lowering prices, into hiring more workers. And that's just what evidence has shown over the last several decades.
And you could theoretically have less money going into the federal government, which could impact budgets, which can impact the debt and the deficits, which we'll get to in a moment. Now, There's some interesting agreement on one thing because President Trump led with eliminating taxes on tips, and Kamala Harris quickly agreed with him. I don't think anyone's truly unpacked the impact, why this would be good or bad for voters. What did you find out?
First off, most tip workers are not working in steakhouses in Vegas getting $500 worth of tips a night. Most of them are already working jobs that equate to minimum wage or a little bit more. And many of them are already getting something called the earned income tax credit, which is that if your family is living below a certain level, which is technically above the poverty line, but still not very good, you get a tax credit. You get money back from the government to make sure that your kids can get clothed and you can get fed. The economists I've spoken to, including I spoke to Simon Johnson, who just won the Nobel Prize in economics this year, and said the best thing to do is simply to raise the earned income tax credit. So if you happen to be working in a casino and walk off 500 grand a year in tips, not really fair that you should pay zero tax while the bus driver, the cop, the firefighter are paying income tax on their income. It really shouldn't matter what your job is. If you're not earning enough money, we're there to help you. And if you are earning enough money, you're there to help the other guy. That seems to make a whole lot more sense than arguing over tipped wages. The other thing people talk about in this area is not having a tipped wage. Why should people who are working in service jobs be paid a third or a fifth per hour of people who are working in other jobs? That's the other question that economists are grappling with.
Yeah, that really was a play for Nevada voters and really only an issue there statewide. Not entirely clear if that would be passed. Now, it's interesting, though, we've heard more about that on the campaign trail than either side actually talking about our debt and our deficit, which is a major concern for our economy. What would happen under both candidates?
Well, this is really interesting. Both of them are going to fund less of the spending than, but neither of them is going to have a zero-sum thing where they raise enough money through taxes to cover additional spending. But economists at the several places, the Center for a Balanced Sensible Federal Budget, have done some number crunching, and they say that with Harris's plan, it would raise the national debt by about $3.5 trillion by 2035. Trump's plan would raise it by more than $7.5 trillion by 2035. But then I went back to Professor Johnson, and I said, well, what about, all these numbers? And he said, actually, the number that matters is whether you're actually able to service the debt. So how much more is the government taking in compared to GDP growth? And as long as the government is taking in enough money to keep paying off the debt, you might as well keep it up because that is the kind of stuff that keeps the economy growing. But neither of these two plans have really taken that into account. Trump's is just twice as expensive as Harris's.
Yeah, really, both parties have truly abandoned any concerns about debt and deficit, which is concerning for most American voters, concerning their kids and their grandkids will live with that debt. Peter Green, great to have you, sir. Should be an interesting week.
Very, very interesting. And keep an eye on the market. I'm sure you've been talking to people about this, but there are a lot of bets as to which way the market's going to go depending on who wins. And I don't think anybody who's forecasting it has a clue what's really going to happen.
Well, they're going to like a Fed cut a couple of days after the election. That we know. Thank you, Peter.
A pleasure.